Mr. Speaker, in my previous life before Congress, I'm a veterinarian and in practice for 30 years, and I've had the pleasure of taking care of all God's creatures, and it's been a privilege, a pleasure, and an honor. But tonight is going to be a special order. You know, so much is going on in Washington and the world, and we hear a lot of bad things going on. We're going to do a special order tonight honoring K9's Veterans Day, March 13th. And this evening, my colleagues and I would like to take a moment and pay tribute to the thousands of working dogs that serve our nations. They serve in the military, they serve in the fire department, the police department, the Department of Drug Enforcement. They serve in your neighbor's house next door to alert people of intruders, maybe a fire, finding a lost child. There's a group of people that do search and rescue only on a volunteer basis. So these unsung heroes, our K9s, serve our nations in many ways. Their contribution to our neighborhoods, communities, towns, cities, states, and even nation cannot be overstated. The biggest of thank yous go out to all of these K9s serving our nation's military, working to keep the homeland safe both here and abroad, as well as our local law enforcement K9s. And tonight, we honor you. Over the few months, I've had the honor to getting to know the working K9s and their handlers that serve the Florida's 3rd Congressional District. After great visits and demonstrations, discussions, and I even had the experience yesterday with our team in our district, experience the subdued tactics of these dogs wearing protective gear, of course. And I'm convinced more than ever that these amazing animals and their handlers need support and recognition of the incredible work that they do. And it's not just in North Central Florida and Northeast Florida. You can find these selfless heroes in all districts all across our great country. Whether it is checking the stadiums top to bottom, which incidentally yesterday when we got talking to the different sheriff's organizations, they said every Gator game at the University of Florida, the dogs check the entire stadium. And for those that have been to the Gator Nation and seen our stadium there, it's a huge stadium, as all are, and they check it before every game, every basketball game, every big venue. And these dogs are out there working to keep Americans safe. Whether it's checking, as I said, the stadiums top to bottom for explosives or narcotics prior to big sporting events, or helping find a missing person, or being there at just the right moment when an officer is in need of backup, these K9s deserve to have their stories heard tonight. And tonight we celebrate National K9 Veterans Day. My colleagues and I intend to do just that. And while we'll celebrate their services tonight, I want to encourage all members to do what they can to support these K9s, their handlers, and the departments they represent. The K9 Day began in World War I when the most famous K9, Sergeant Stubby, shined the spotlight on the incredible working dogs and the value they bring to our national service. And Brigadier General Scott Perry is going to talk about Stubby more tonight, and so I'll leave that for him. In Vietnam, nearly 4,000 dogs actively served, and in Iraq, these dogs were critical in sniffing out deadly IEDs. Since then, these dogs have served in our military, our law enforcement, working hard to keep Americans safe. We owe not just today to these K9s, but a thanks every day for their service. To begin tonight, I'd like to recognize the K9 teams that serve in my home district, and I'll share many of these stories here tonight. However, I want to start with one of my favorites from Alachua County, the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. In 2017, in the far northern reaches of rural Alachua County, a previous victim of domestic violence and battery was walking out to meet detectives when she heard the voice of her assailant calling to her from the darkness. Terrified, she ran back inside, called 911, and the deputies responded in an effort to catch the suspect with active warrants that included kidnapping and sexual assault. Deputy Sheriff Chris Drake and K9 Rouse arrived knowing full well that the suspect had not only stolen the victim's car with a gun inside earlier, but dug a hole and buried himself to elude a helicopter searchlight and the FLIR camera the night before. And with that information, Chris and his dog Roos began to track the suspect. Lifting K9 Rouse over some fences and cutting their way through others, Deputy Drake and others continued following the suspect's scents until, as Drake reported, report reads, Rouse still smelling human odors, ears forward, and staring intently, identified something laying in the water. The man stood up from the water, turned north in the woods, and disappeared. Continuing their track, K9 Rouse and Deputy Drake again found the suspect hiding in a separate swamp with only his back exposed. Not a good thing with a catch dog. When challenged, the felon fled again, and K9 Rouse was released to catch him. K9 Rouse ran into the waters, swam briefly, and apprehended the suspect on the arm, enduring many puncture wounds. But while Rouse was doing this, he endured many punches to the head, but he held on until deputies could arrive and assist placing the suspect in handcuffs for a trip to the hospital and then to jail. These deputies and their K9 partners are on the road every day, working 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day, supporting every local law enforcement patrol task and providing mutual aid to our neighborhood jurisdictions when called upon. And with that, I'd like to yield the floor to my distinguished colleague, another veterinarian from Louisiana, Representative Abraham.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today is National K9's Veterans Day, and as a member of the Veterinary Caucus, I rise to commemorate the service of our four-legged friends who assist our military and police force in keeping our nation and our communities safe. Though the War Dogs program, or K9 Corps, as it is commonly known, was first established during World War II, dogs have been assisting our soldiers since pit bulls were used for security during the Civil War. On March 13, 1942, the K9 Corps was officially born and became immediately effective. Dogs were used in the Pacific Theater, where it has been said that the Japanese never ambushed or made a surprise attack on a patrol led by one of these dogs. It is estimated that the Army employed 1,500 dogs during the Korean War and 4,000 dogs during the Vietnam War. With noses 100,000 times as sensitive as humans, our soldiers continue to use them today to sniff for bombs in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. One named Cairo was even used to sniff for bombs around Osama bin Laden's compound during the raid to take him down. Just like soldiers, these dogs go through rigorous training to serve our nation. Their courage, loyalty, and acumen have saved countless lives. We appreciate their service and the service of their trainers and the soldiers who use them on the battlefield. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Abraham. Next, I'd like to welcome and yield the floor to my good friend, Brigadier General Mr. Scott Perry.
Well, thank you, gentlemen from Florida, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also want to join my friends in honoring the National K9 Veterans Day. Every March 13th, we commemorate the United States Army's first K9 Corps training program. While this program began in 1942, the history of our best friend engaging in training and combat with us extends well beyond that date. Today, we commemorate the iconic Sergeant Stubby. Now, if you don't know about Stubby, Sergeant Stubby was a Brindle Bull Terrier mutt from New Haven, Connecticut. Now, Stubby was adopted by U.S. Army Private Robert Conroy, who stowed him away on a ship bound for France in the First World War, where his service was integral to saving American lives. Stubby was allowed to join our soldiers on the front lines after he was discovered by Private Conroy's commanding officer. Because Stubby rendered a salute to the commander, he was allowed to stay. Now, while on the front, he was injured. He was once injured during a gas strike, and he developed a unique sense of smell, or sensitivity to the smell of chemical weapons used at that time, and his sensitivity was used to alert sleeping troops to another gas attack, and he rescued them on numerous occasions from the ill and very painful fate. Sergeant Stubby also thwarted a German spy attempting to map out the battlefield of the Allied trenches, and Sergeant Stubby did that by grabbing onto the German soldier, biting him and subduing him till the Americans soldiers could arrive. Sergeant Stubby served in 17 battles during World War I, 17 separate battles. Private Conroy's grandson, Kurt Dean, recalled stories about Stubby. My grandfather was always clear. Stubby was a service dog. He gave to the troops, he gave them comfort, and he gave them support. He used to run through the trenches and warn about the gas attacks. He used to go outside of the trenches and into the sort of no man's land between the two sets of trenches and the two competing armies. And he would stand by the soldiers that were injured until U.S. personnel could arrive and come get them. Sergeant Stubby became a lifetime member of the American Legion and was recognized as the mascot of Georgetown University in the 1920s, where Private Conroy then studied law. In 1921, Stubby was awarded the Humane Education Society's Hero Dog Gold Medal, and he earned the honor of meeting General John Blackjack Pershing, the highest-ranking service member since General George Washington at that time. Now, Sergeant Stubby died in Private Conroy's arms on March 16, 1926. Today, Sergeant Stubby is set to be immortalized in an animated film premiering next month. So that'll be great for us all to see. His loyalty, bravery, and selfishness is the legacy for thousands of service dogs being trained at any given time in all branches of our military, as well as our local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. While we aren't able yet to measure the exact number of lives saved by service dogs, one thing is certain. A dog is really man's best friend, and women's best friend as well. We're forever grateful and indebted to these animals and applaud them, their handlers, and caretakers for their tireless service and devotion to duty and showing us the true meaning of battle buddy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
I'd like to thank my good friend from Pennsylvania, Brigadier General Scott Perry, and sharing that story. And it's amazing. The attitude of the dog, the canine, the loyalty of the dog, the singularity of purpose in their drive and the ambition. And like I said yesterday, we got to experience canine dogs, the police canine dogs, and we got to experience them going after a victim. And I was the victim, and I had a glove on my arm. But the intent of those dogs and the way they just focus, and then they showed us a demonstration of sniffing out gunpowder, and they hid it in a big room and all course of explosives. And the intent of those dogs and the direction of them, and they just go to the task, don't complain, and I think there's a lesson that we all can learn from that. So I thank you for your participation in that great story. I look forward to that movie. And it's funny how dogs, people say they can't talk and all that, but we know they do through their body language, and that's why movies like that highlight the actions of an animal, or especially dogs, they do so well, and so I know that'll be a blockbuster. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'd like to yield the floor as much time as he needs to a great friend of mine from North Carolina, Mr. Walter Jones.
Thank you so much for having this evening tonight and letting us talking about the importance of these dogs that are more than dogs. They are buddies to our men and women in uniform who've been fighting for America. Mr. Speaker and Mr. Yoho, in the year 2000, I had the honor and the pleasure of meeting John Burnham, retired United States Army combat infantryman and dog handler during the Vietnam War. He approached me with the idea of a war dog memorial to honor our brave K9 veterans. John shared with me the impact that these animals had on him and his fellow handlers in the 60s. They are forever emotionally grateful for their canine buddies. Through this relationship, as we began to work on a war dog memorial that took several years, in 2007, a Marine named Dustin Lee was killed in the Iraq War, and John had written a story, wanted me to read the story and then speak out and reach out to General Regner, United States Marine Corps, and ask him to please let's retire this wonderful animal named Lex, a German Shepherd, who had also been wounded with his master, and asked General Regner to reach out to the Air Force who owned these dogs to retire Lex. I want to read briefly the story that John had written and given to me. I'm going to read 5 paragraphs. It's a 5-page article. My partner, Dustin. I'm a U.S. Marine and the primary element of a two-member team trained to hunt and locate explosives. My partner and I trained as a team for many months, honing our expertise to save American lives in the war on terrorism in Iraq. It's March 21st, 2007. I'm on the job in Fallujah, Iraq, when an enemy-fired rocket-propelled grenade explodes in our midst. I'm blasted to the ground and stunned. My head is ringing and my body feels numb. My eyes can't quite focus on anything. My partner is lying next to me, severely wounded and bleeding. I move to him and touch him, but he's not responding. I feel sharp pains in my side and back. I'm bleeding, but deal with it and concentrate on comforting my partner and protecting him from further harm. Everything is happening so fast that I'm disoriented and confused. My senses pick up the lingering smell of burnt powder and smoke from the explosion. I hear lots of American voices and heavy boot steps hurrying all around us. They reach our location and immediately attend to my partner, then carry him away. I'm separated from my partner for the first time. I'm not clear of thought, and then I'm carried away, but to a different hospital. I'm in a building lying on a table with lights and above and people talking. Still dazed and confused, I hear a strange voice saying my name, Lex. I gestured to a slight reflex of acknowledgement. Lex, you're going to be okay, buddy. Just lay still. We're going to take care of your wounds. So stay calm, okay. Then my eyes dart around the room searching my partner, but he's not there and no one can interpret my thoughts. The partner died. I was called by John Burnham to read this story. I sent this story to General Mike Regner. I said, Mike, we need to retire this dog for the family. Mr. Speaker, the family lived in Mississippi. I didn't know him. But this touched my heart, this story. I'm going to submit it for the record, the entire story, with your permission, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection.
I called Mike and I said, Mike, this family has lost everything, their son. They want Lex to live the rest of his life with shrapnel in the dog's back. And so the Air Force agreed with General Regner and retired the dog. That dog spent 8 years with the family of the Marine who was killed. The other story, and then I'm going to close in about 2 minutes. I went over to Walter Reed on a regular basis during the Iraq War, and I never will forget a young Army guy who had lost his leg told me the story. He was a dog handler of the platoon waiting for the dog to go out and sniff an IED. The dog goes out, finds the IED, and the dog turns around and looks at the platoon. Then the IED exploded. There are so many of these stories that it's hard to even to get a record on it. In closing, I want to thank former President George W. Bush. He signed the bill to erect a War Dog Memorial at Lackland Air Force Base. John Burnham deserves so much credit. He got the private sector to pay for the memorial at Lackland Air Force Base. So the dogs that Mr. Yoho and others have spoken about tonight will never be forgotten. There is a memorial for them and the work they've done for this country. I want to say that, to me, of all the things, I've been in Congress 20 years, but when you touch a dog, you touch a child. And these dogs have done so much to save the children who are now soldiers and Marines and Airmen and Navy, to save those people from being killed by IEDs and the enemy. So again, Mr. Yoho, thank you very much for putting this together. And I thank God that we can always remember that an animal is a gift from God as much as we are as human beings. I yield back to Mr. Yoho. Thank you.
I thank my good friend from North Carolina, and I love that story. It's a great story. And what you touched about is the loyalty the trust, the integrity of these working dogs, not only in the work they do, but when they come back to the home, of what they do. It's unconditional love and unconditional loyalty. We should take a lesson from that as humans, shouldn't we?
Amen. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to tell a story from my district, and this deals with seizing the drugs and profits that arm criminals. As part of their regular assigned duties with the Gainesville-Alachua County Drug Task Force, Sergeant Brian Jones and K9 Jerry responded to assist another agent with a traffic stop on Interstate I-75. Despite a series of efforts by the suspect, like those seen on television, to hide contraband in hidden compartments, K9 Jerry couldn't be fooled. Locating nearly $100,000 in cash and over a kilogram of narcotics. It's just amazing how these dogs know what to do, and they're so well at it. They smell things that we can't even think about with their sensory perception. Another story is rescuing those that need our help. In February 2018, the Florida Highway Patrol contacted the Alachua County Sheriff's Office after finding an abandoned vehicle along Interstate 75 near San Velasco Hammock Preserve State Park. It appeared as though the driver, diagnosed with a mental illness and having fled his home in South Florida, may have wandered into the park and its over 7,000 acres of forests, sinkholes, rattlesnakes, ponds, alligators, and trails. Deputy Sheriff Lloyd O'Quinn and K9 Enos began tracking the subject through the woods until becoming physically exhausted in the heat. Deputy Sheriff Wes Riley and K9 Knight, Deputy Sheriff Esau Bright and K9 Roscoe, Deputy Sheriff Chris Drake again and K9 Rouse, and Sergeant Mitchell Herlocker and K9 Havoc all responded and relieved one another with tracking throughout the park. After tracking and searching the wooded area for several hours, and with the help of the prison bloodhound sent to assist from the Florida Department of Corrections, the driver was safely located, provided the treatment he needed at an area hospital to the relief of his family and friends far away. Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'd like to yield the floor to a good friend of mine that served in our military in the Army, Mr. Tom Garrett from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague, Mr. Yoho from Florida, on this day when we honor dogs that serve honorably, just like the women and men who serve our country, for putting on this special order. Anyone who's ever had a dog understands the depths of the bonds that can develop between human beings and their four-legged friends. I can remember every single dog that we've ever owned. I can remember how each one died. I can remember being there when two died. I never had the discipline or the opportunity or honor to serve with the working dogs that defend not just our country abroad, but also here at home. But as I say of my time in the military, I'm not a hero, but I've gotten to meet some. In researching for this opportunity to honor those four-legged heroes and those with whom they work, I had the opportunity to read about some books. Always Faithful, a document of Marine Corps working dogs by William Putney, Dogs of War by Lisa Rognac, War Dogs by Rebecca Frankel, and Sergeant Rex by Mike Dowling, among the most highly commended, as well as one, Unconditional Honor, primarily by Kathy Scott, which recognizes the fact that those of you watching at home and this record might not contemplate, and that is the role that dogs play, not just on the battlefield and in finding missing people and fighting crime here at home, but also in helping our servicemen and women recover from wounds visible and invisible when they return to this country. Indeed, thousands of service members, welcomed by a climate that is shifting as it relates to service dogs, take the definition of working dog beyond the battlefield and outside of the field of crime and punishment into bedrooms and living rooms, and help our brothers and sisters heal from wounds that most of us praise God, we'll never be able to imagine. As I think has been noted, at any given time, there are well over 2,000 military working dogs with roughly 700 serving overseas. These specially trained dogs can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 to procure and train, and about 30 service dogs annually are killed in the line of duty. When I was in the military, we always looked with admiration upon the individuals that had the decorations and the pins and the adornments that very few people would earn. One such was Halo Wings. That stands for High Altitude Low Opening. That's when you jump out of an airplane so high that someone couldn't possibly imagine that there might be someone inserting via this mechanism. Well, indeed, we have military dogs that insert this way, as well as strapped to their handlers via helicopter and any other imaginable circumstance. In fact, as I look at history, the oldest documented accounts of dogs either being used as accoutrements to defend their people or accompanying their masters onto the field of battle are almost 3,000 years old, and this is about as long as we can go back into documented and written history. But tonight, Mr. Speaker, I want to speak briefly about a personal friend and hero. In early 2006, Patrick Sheridan of the Louisa County Sheriff's Office procured Magpie electric potential from a bloodhound kennel in New Jersey and began working very hard with that, I believe, the second dog with whom what would become Lieutenant Sheridan would train. In fact, Lieutenant Sheridan and his K9 team have become so successful in working K9 operations and scent tracking specifically that they've trained individuals on multiple continents in multiple nations. And over the course of Magpie Electric Potential, aka Maggie's 6-year career, she worked almost 350 calls for service. In 2010 alone, her duties ranged from trailing, breaking, and entering suspects in violent crime cases to helping locate a missing 5-year-old child before that child succumbed to the elements. On December 12, 2011, Maggie and Lieutenant Sheridan were not engaged in chasing down a drug dealer or finding some horrific individual and preventing them from visiting domestic violence on someone once too frequently victimized, but instead searching for an individual who had been reported missing and suicidal. I make this point to note that these dogs defend the people with whom they serve and the people of our communities. On this occasion, Maggie, while trailing again on nearly her 350th working call, encountered a pit bull and ultimately was attacked and succumbed to her injuries. Her end of watch on December 12, 2011 represents one of hundreds of working dog deaths just this century. I too commend former President Bush for the establishment and the use of private citizen dollars to do such of a war dog memorial, and hope that we'll see something similar done as it relates to those working dogs who defend us not in the military but in law enforcement here at home, not only by pursuing and apprehending criminals, but also by finding missing children and those who might harm themselves. Mr. Speaker, I would commend to those viewing and to the members of this body, when they find a dog handler or someone who had worked as a dog handler in the past, please say thank you for the dedication, time, and loyalty that is indeed reciprocal and unconditional, because we need never fathom how many lives have been saved. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the good gentleman from Virginia. And since you talked about that, you brought up some great things there, Congressman Garrett. The dedication of the handlers. Here we've got the Clay County Sheriff's Department with Diesel, a bloodhound, that these guys are so dedicated with the dogs that they work with. It's unbelievable. And the good they do, the search and the rescue that they do. And you brought up on Maggie how she had the 350th working call that Maggie had performed for the people of our country. And this is something people don't realize, the amount of calls these dogs go on and the amount of work that they do. The average lifespan or service of these dogs is anywhere from 7 to 9 years. And people wonder about the cost of the dog, the cost of a program. Yeah, it's expensive to keep these dogs. But what we have found is so many people are out there that are good-hearted, that realize the benefit of the working canine, that they donate the cost of the dog. Many times the cost of the dog can run from $5,000 to $9,000 by the time you get it trained, and $4,000 to $5,000 a year to maintain these. And there's a lot of community help to make sure this gets done. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to talk about another dog at the Gainesville Police Department. Justice is a German Shepherd who worked for the Gainesville Police Department starting in September 2006. During his career, Justice was responsible for locating hundreds of offenders. He assisted several other agencies throughout his career, to include the Florida Highway Patrol, the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, the Putnam County Sheriff's Office, University of Florida Police Department, the City of Alachua Police Department, and the City of High Springs Police Department. Justice was credited with saving a life. The incident involved a suicidal person who had taken a deadly amount of prescription pills, left a suicide note, and walked off into the woods. After 2 hours of officers trying to locate the person, Officer Owens and Justice were called to the scene while off duty. Justice was able to track and locate the person, who was passed out by the effects of the pill and clinging to life. EMS was called and the person was taken to the hospital. Doctors stated if the person was not located when they were, the medications taken would have no doubt ended in their death and another suicide. Justice received a life-saving award through the department. On the last night of his career, Justice was called to locate a suspect that fled from an officer who recognized him as a felony habitual traffic offender and a drug dealer. The officer tried to conduct a traffic stop on the vehicle being driven by the suspect. When the officer activated his overhead lights, the suspect turned off his headlights, accelerated to a high speed, fleeing through a neighborhood. The officer did not pursue the vehicle. Another officer located the vehicle abandoned minutes later. A perimeter search was established. Officer Charles Owens and Justice responded to the scene. Justice began a track from the driver's side door. The track led through several backyards and for several blocks. Justice's track led into a wooded area where the suspect was located by Justice, trying to conceal himself under a fallen tree. If not for Justice, the suspect would have eluded captors, and Justice was sent to retire at the end of the shift, which ended at 4 a.m. He captured his last suspect just in the nick of time at 3 a.m. Officer Owens took possession of Justice after his retirement, and they have been with each other since. And Justice turns 15 on March 15th of this year, and it's still as active as he can be in his seasoned age. And I think, again, that's a model for all of us to follow. Another story, Mr. Speaker, K9 deputy successfully takes down an armed suicidal subject. The Marion County Sheriff's Office deputies responded to the 17800 block of County Road 25 in reference to a domestic altercation. It was learned that the suspect battered and strangled a female victim. The suspect fled the area just prior to the deputies' arrival. K9 Deputy Jeremy Nix and K9 Drago tracked and located the suspect in a wooded area. The suspect advised he was armed with a firearm and a knife and threatened suicide. Deputy Nix was able to create a dialogue with the suspect and persuaded him to surrender peacefully. He did not have a firearm but was armed with a knife. The suspect was arrested and charged with domestic battery by strangulation and is being held in the Marion County Jail on $10,000 bond. During this standoff, K9 Deputy Nix and K9 Drago accidentally stepped into a yellow jacket nest and were stung over 20 times. K9 Draco was taken to the veterinarian's office to be checked out after the call, and he and Deputy Nix recovered and back to work. Great job for everyone. The K9 team locates burglar, recovers approximately $3,500 of stolen property on the morning of Thursday, February 1st, 2018. At the Marion County's office, deputies They responded to Ernie's Auction Center located at 5305 South Pine in reference to a burglary that just occurred. As employees were opening the business, it was observed that the front door had been forcibly entered and the suspects were observed running through the inside of the business. K9 Deputy Brandon Donahue and his K9 partner Tipster and Deputy Nicholas Frost immediately tracked the suspect and located him within 30 minutes. During the track, 2 different locations were found where the suspects were stashing stolen items from the business. The stolen property, valued at $3,500, was recovered and returned to the business owner. People just don't realize the acute sense that these dogs have and why they're so valuable. Another story, K9 Deputy Brian Litz and Rip. On February 7, 2004, K9 Brian Litz and another deputy responded to the Pine Run subdivision in reference to a well-being check on a 74-year-old individual. When the deputies arrived at the house, the individual met them at the door with a handgun. K9 Deputy Litz was attempting to pass under the front window of the home to get a better visual on the individual with the gun. Unknown to K9 Deputy Litz, this person was watching from the window, and he then shot and killed Litz. Today, a statue in honor of Deputy Litz and his K9 stands proudly in Florida's capital. In a tragic twist, Deputy Litz's call sign was Batman. And today, visitors of this statue at the Florida Capitol can find the Batman emblem on the bottom of his K9's foot. Just an amazing story, and again, a great example of the ability of these dogs and their success in helping out with people, whether it's the person in need, the lost individual, search and rescue, the drug dealer, and just people that want to do other people harms and domestic violence. I just want to briefly talk about dogs and handlers. The Putnam County Sheriff's Office has 5 dogs. Aries, handled by Sergeant Randy Hayes. Judo by Blaine Moody. Zeke, Jerry Gentry is the handler. Halo, Jose Garriga. And Putnam, named after the county, handled by Emmett Merritt. Bradford County Sheriff's Officers, Deputy Brandon Shoup and K9 Grimm. Ocala Police Department, Officer King and K9 Zorba. Officer Burgos and K9 Babo. Officer Arnold and K9 Senior. And the Marion County Sheriff's Office, again yesterday, where we had the privilege of going down, and we presented all the working dogs and their handlers with our Congressional Challenge coin. And as you can see, that dog, it looks rather well the way he's wearing that. But at the Marion County Sheriff's Office, where we were yesterday and got to demonstrate, have the demonstration on the catch dogs or attack dogs, we got a great demonstration. There was Sergeant Daniel Trammell, K9 Nitro, K9 Deputy Alan Lee, who handles K9 Zeus, K9 Deputy Timothy Fretz with his dog Robo, Deputy Colton Sullivan with his dog Adelmo, Deputy Matt Bowers with Otto, which is named after a retirement village that donated the money for their dog, Deputy Jeremy Nix with his dog Drago, Deputy Brandon Donahue with his dog Tipster, as we just heard the story, Deputy Matt Hooper with Rambo, the Gainesville Police Department, Corporal Jeff Carrico with his dog Rue, Corporal Dylan Hayes Morrison and his K9 Aries, Officer Rob Rogers and K9 Nero, Officer Ed Ratliff and his dog Ace, Officer Josh Muir and his dog Ranger, and the Alachua County Sheriff's Office, Deputy Sheriff Lloyd O'Quinn and K9 Enos, we just heard a story about them, a Malinois working in patrol, narcotics, and tracking, Deputy Sheriff Eso Bright and K9 Deacon, a Malinois working in patrol, narcotics, and trafficking. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. These dogs are trained in multiple disciplines and just work their hearts out. Deputy Sheriff Mikkel McCoy and his dog Chaos, a Malinois working in patrol, narcotics, and trafficking. Sheriff Brian Ritter and his dog Colt of Malinois working in patrol narcotics and trafficking. Deputy Sheriff Chris Grisick and his dog Mac of Malinois working in patrol, bombing, and tracking. Then there's Deputy Sheriff Bill Arnold and his dog Wick of Malinois working in patrol, narcotics, and trafficking. I think we're getting the point here of how valuable these dogs are, and I would recommend to people, if you want to see the value and why we want to spend money and allow these dogs to be in our law enforcement, military, DEA, is watch demonstrations of these dogs and the acuteness of them. There's Sheriff Chris Drake and his dog Rouse, a Malinois working in patrol, bomb, and tracking. Michael Herlocker, who we heard the story of, and his K9 partner, Havoc, a Malinois working in patrol, bomb, and tracking. Deputy Sheriff Adam Diaz and his dog Shiloh, a Labrador Retriever working with the Drug Task Force. Sergeant Brian Jones and K9 Jerry, a Malinois working with the Drug Task Force. And then there's Sergeant Nigel Lowy and K9 Zoe, a mixed breed working narcotics detection in our schools. K9 Malzy, a Malinois, just joining the sheriff's office as a gun detection dog in our school. And it's interesting, as we, after the Parkland shooting on February 14th, we had a roundtable of law enforcement, county sheriffs, city police chiefs, superintendents, school resource officers. And one of the things that came out of there is, how the resource officers in our schools, they act as a deterrent for a lot of the kids. They're there, they see a person of authority. But one of the sheriffs brought up, I thought was a great suggestion that a lot of people also thought was a great suggestion, and that's a dog that can detect gunpowder in our schools. And let them tour the schools. Let them show what the policemen can do beneficially to all of us. It's a shame that we're in a time in society where we have to worry about guns going off in school. But until we rectify the underlying cause of that, I think we need to do what we can to keep our schools safe so our kids feel safe going to school. And I just want to end with this picture. Again, this is the Clay County Sheriff's Office with their dog Diesel, who proudly took our Congressional Challenge coin. And I want to give a shout out to all the offices that participated and shared stories with us. We're proud of you. We're proud of your K9's. I don't want to say we're more proud of the K9's than we are of you, but we're proud of all of you for the work that you do to keep us safer as citizens of the 3rd Congressional District, but also around the country and around the world. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back, and I thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2017, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to be recognized to address you here on the floor of the United